Hello, and welcome to the Jewish Policy Center webinar. I am Shoshana Bryan, Senior Director of the JPC, and your host. Our guest today is Professor Mark Meirowitz, and our focus is a combination of Syria and Turkey, because while almost everybody is rightly watching Iran and praying for the people of Iran, almost nobody is watching Syria. The rise of ISIS, the decimation of America's allies, and Israel's allies, Kurds, the Druze, the Yazidis, under the rule of al-Shara or al-Jawani or whatever you want to call him. And we're not watching his relations with Turkey, and we should. So today we are specifically going to consider Turkey's role in Syria. The last time Mark was with us, which was last August, I said, and I'll read it, the overthrow of Bashar Assad in Syria by the jihadist-oriented HTS ended one horrifying chapter in Syrian history. It also fundamentally changed the Middle East politically and militarily, including perhaps for Iran. Turkey has a major role in this. So I said it, and Mark talked about it, but we're going to do it again. At that time, there were a lot of people who had hopes for Syria, that the hideous civil war that al-Assad had brought to the people was over and that they could move in a better direction. So Mark is going to tell us how it worked out. But first, your JPC commercial will go short form today. You can find the Jewish Policy Center on our website, jewishpolicycenter.org. There you can sign up for our Insight articles and our magazine In Focus Quarterly. The winter issue of In Focus is up right now. It's our American Birthday issue. Also check out our In Context briefs and the library of our webinars. That's jewishpolicycenter.org. The JPC supports a strong American defense capability, U.S.-Israel security cooperation, and missile defense. We support the legitimacy and security of the State of Israel against anyone who would deny them. And we support the government of Israel and the IDF in their determination to secure the borders and the people from the malign forces around it, both in Gaza and elsewhere, to eliminate the military and governing power of Hamas and Hezbollah, and to bring home the last hostage. Ron Gavili, do not forget, there is one hostage left. Domestically, the JPC advocates for small government, low taxes, free trade, fiscal responsibility, energy security, free speech, and intellectual diversity. And now today's guest. Dr. Mark Meirowitz is a professor of humanities at the Maritime College of the State University of New York. He teaches American history, foreign policy, and the Constitution. We could have him here like every week to do something different. Mark has a PhD in political science from Fordham University and a JD from Brooklyn Law School. His domestically oriented classes have included the Supreme Court and the Constitution, the immigrant experience in America, which we're going to talk about another time, American women's history, and labor history. On the foreign policy front, he is an expert in Turkish foreign policy, Turkish-U.S. relations, and Turkish-Israeli relations, which is why I invited a Turkey expert to talk about Syria, because what happens in Syria is increasingly not directed by Syrians. So it is my great pleasure, Mark Meirowitz, that we turn to you and your expertise for a better understanding. And I'm going to start with a question. Turkey has been a problem. Well, the Ottoman Empire was a different kind of problem. But Turkey has been a problem since the invasion of Cyprus in 1974. The invasion prompted some aggravation in the West, but Turkey never paid a price. Was that beginning of Turkey's exercise of regional power in the modern era?
First of all, thank you, Shoshana, for the privilege of again doing a webinar with you and working with you, which is really, I would say, one of the great privileges of my life to work with you. So thank you very, very much. I learned so much from you. So I think that's a very, very big question. Look, Turkey's view of itself is kind of characterized by President Erdogan saying that Turkey is greater than Turkey. In other words, the Turks have always thought of themselves as more than just limited by their land borders. And clearly, I mean, it'd be interesting to comment on that because they have had a very fraught history where, and this is very relevant to what's going on in Syria today and also Iran and Gaza and so forth. and the idea that the European powers tried to dismember Turkey. So this created a certain, I would say, nationalism, whether it's Ottomanism or it's Turkish nationalism, but a strong sense of national identity. And in the recent past, a strong sense of support with President Erdogan and his idea of putting Turkey on the playing field of world powers. So about Cyprus, I mean, I really don't know how to characterize that because, and it relates also to our discussion because Greece and Israel and Cyprus have made an alliance recently to be a buffer against Turkey. Now, if you ask the Turks about the invasion of or the incursion into the Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus, their view would be to say that they were rescuing the Turkish Cypriots from the Greek Cypriots. And I've actually been in Turkish Cyprus. And I've spoken to many Turkish Cypriots, both there and in the United States, here and elsewhere. So it's not a simplistic answer that really relates purely to Turkish intervention. There's more to it. I think if you look at the whole issue overall, you will see that there have been so many missed opportunities. And who to blame? I'll tell you who to blame in a moment, but missed opportunities to forge a peace on the island, on Cyprus, because Cyprus is an interesting island. It has a Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus, which is actually not recognized by any country other than Turkey. Then you have the Republic of Cyprus, and then you have this ongoing squabble, what to do with, how to set up a peaceful relationship between the Turkish and Greek portions of the island. And now I'll tell you who to blame. I blame the parents. You know how it is when you're with your kids, the parents go with the kids, they go in the room, and the kids can't decide anything because every time they do, the parents intervene and say, no, do it my way. And this is exactly what happened between Turkey and Greece, because the Greeks had this idea of enosis, where they wanted to unite the Greek islands and Greek Cyprus to the mother country, and Turkey had the idea of protecting the Turkish Cypriots, and never the twain would meet. So the kind of kids in the room who were the Cypriots themselves never got a chance to really work out something on their own. That's a big subject, maybe for another day. But I think the relevance for this discussion is the coalitions that are developing in the region. For example, we have Saudi with Pakistan, and Turkey wants to join that alliance. As I mentioned before, Greece, Israel, and Greek Cyprus getting together on sort of like a SWAT team or getting ready for military preparedness in case of an emergency. You're seeing what is, I think, a lack of, let us say, confidence in the parents, the United States, the Europeans, in dealing with these issues. So they feel they need to make their own regional alliances. So at the end of the day, the Middle East is, and certainly the Frank Kishon stories is correct, it's the Middle East, the frog and the scorpion, and we don't see a future, I don't think, of peace. We see a picture of ongoing, I call it a train wreck, particularly in Syria. So we can pick up on that. But I think that clearly it's not just Cyprus might have been really sui generis, really a unique opportunity, but again, it's in the context of the relationship between Turkey and Greece, which is a much bigger and much more complicated relationship. So I hope that I tried to answer what was a gigantically complicated question.
You did, and I hadn't meant to go off on Cyprus, but I just wondered if that was playing in Erdogan's thinking. But now let's move ourselves, because I agree with you, it's a train wreck. Talk to us now about what's happening in Syria. Who's leading the charge? Who's paying the price?
That's a good way to characterize it. Look, I mean, what happened, as you said, was that Assad fell. And of course, how did Assad fall? You have to kind of go back there and say, okay, how come? Well, Israel. We know that all over the world, it's always Israel. It's always Israel. All roads lead to Israel. But clearly, Israel took out the Iranian defenses, took out the Syrian defenses. The Russians were busy in Ukraine. So that gave an opportunity to al-Shara, or his nom de guerre, al-Jolani, which, by the way, relates to the fact that his family owned olive groves in the Golan. Okay, so this offered an opportunity for a literally small group of fighters, jihadis, maybe 35,000, 40,000 approximately, to come and take over the government, to topple Assad. This could never have happened without Israel weakening the Syrian defenses, Iranian defenses, and the Russians being diverted with Ukraine. So then they come into power, and to make, I guess, a very fraught, difficult, and very disturbing story short, they went ahead and decided that al-Shara is the guy. He's going to lead the regime. And then they came up with, so, okay, what are you going to do about government? Well, he said, all right, I'm going to be the head of it. And essentially, they make a committee for a constitution. And this is not like the 250th anniversary of the United States. They just go, okay, make a committee. They put together a document. And the document essentially concedes, in fact, that there will be Sharia law and that al-Shara will be the one to appoint everything and everyone. And that's come up also with the parliament. They have what I call a Potemkin parliament, right? Part of it is appointed by him and part of it is appointed by a committee that he appoints. And in that context, essentially, it's really not inclusive. We always talk about inclusiveness in America. This one's not inclusive. It doesn't really give power to the minorities you spoke about, Druze, Alawite, Christians, Kurds, and so forth. They weren't in the mix. So that was kind of when they were all talking, and al-Shara was trying to consolidate power. But then came the question of what to do. And I should mention massacres of the Druze. We know that occurred, massacres of Alawites, Christians living in fear, and the Kurds. So what happens? Well, the Kurds have been allies of the United States and have fought with us through what's called the SDF, but SDF was a mixed Arab and Kurd force. But the key piece of it was the YPG, which kind of the male contingent of Kurdish fighters, and the YPJ, women fighters. And, really, they remind me a lot of the, Israeli women who fight in the IDF, I have to say, because they're very courageous and they're really in the forefront fighting for what they believe in. Now, what happens is that al-Shara now is faced with the following conundrum. Well, the Kurds control the oil and gas reserves and the dam, Tishrin, and the water resources. In the Middle East, whoever controls the water is the one in power. So what to do about this? Well, he proposes an agreement, and I'm bringing the United States into it because that's really the linchpin of it. He brings in the United States to make an agreement with the Kurds that they will integrate into the military. That is to say, they will give up their 100,000. They are strong fighters. They have their units that are battle hardened. They're going to basically give that up and integrate into the military. Well, the Kurds didn't like that idea. They wanted to remain separate. And one of the functions that the Kurds had was to guard. First of all, they were pivotal in capturing and fighting the ISIS prisoners. In the prisoners of Shaddadi, and I think it's called Al-Hol. Al-Hol actually is a place where the women and children, the families of the ISIS fighters, are located, and they're radicalized. So there is one unbelievable mess, I would say, of the proportion of Shakespeare's Macbeth. I mean, of the brew of crises, but the Kurds took responsibility to protect and guard those prisons. Okay, now, and the United States is involved because CENTCOM, which is our military, is still in Syria, part of which our contingent was withdrawn, but it was still there. And the question is what to do. Well, enter Tom Barrack, and we're making a big, really important story very short, is our ambassador to Turkey and our envoy to Syria. And I'm going to stop Tom Barrack for a moment because you asked about Turkey, and that's very important. Turkey is a key player in Syria. Why? Because they have always supported al-Jolani or al-Shara. and HTS. They supported him in Idlib. They supported him all along. And they decided, and I think I can understand their rationale for it, he's the go-to guy. We want a stable Syria. We don't want Syria to collapse, because if Syria collapses, then the refugees who have gone to Turkey and which we want to return to a peaceful Syria can't return because the country's going to fall apart. By the way, the same rationale with Iran, which we can talk about, where the Turks do not want the collapse of the Iranian regime. They're fearful, again, of the, let's say, the large number of Kurds in Iran, Kurds in Turkey, that somehow that will be will upset the whole, stability of Turkey and the region. So what do? They support al-Shara. They put him in place. Maybe they even go to Brooks Brothers and get him a nice outfit. He looks good, and then he goes to meet with President Trump, and then so makes such an impression. And most recently, Trump said that al-Shara, oh, great guy. He's a rough resume, but boy, he's tough. And not a word about the massacres, not a word about any of that. And now we have Tom Barrack. Now, Tom Barrack has taken the position that the Kurds in Syria are, in effect, passé. Their role, he says, has expired. Their role in protecting the prisons has expired. Now, what does this mean? What it means is, what we've seen is that 3 American service members were killed by a Syrian officer who was probably in ISIS. And we know that ISIS fighters have escaped, maybe with the assistance of Syrian forces that are now taking over the Kurdish enclaves, and they've actually taken over the oil and gas that I talked about, and taken over the water and the dams. So what is America's response? CENTCOM is now evacuating the ISIS fighters back to Iraq. We have a collapsing, desperate situation for the Kurds, who are now, for example, in Kobani, where they have no access to electricity, food, or water. Which is interesting, because I just like to stop it, because you know that the United Nations have been absolutely outraged at what Israel has been doing in Gaza. But what do you see at the United Nations about what goes on in Syria? Nothing. Nothing. There was a press conference with one of the people from the UN Human Rights Commission, which actually has Iran, I think, as a major member, which tells you something. And the guy asked them, what do you think about this humanitarian crisis? Now, okay, we're very concerned about it. I mean, this is typical of the United Nations. So nobody's doing anything about it. Nobody's convening meetings. This is going ahead. And Barrack, this is the point, and the Wall Street Journal has a very powerful editorial saying he's basically facilitating the destruction of the Kurds, and they've been our allies, and they question what they call Tom Barrack's Syrian adventure. So I think that this is what I would say is the great crisis. Just as a last point, and that is that Barrack is a friend of the president. And instead, the president is basically busy with all kinds of other issues. And he's also very favorable to President Erdogan. So he has really adopted, as Barrack has, Turkey's approach to this, which is stability in Syria above all. And we need al-Shara in place. And where we go from here is uncertain. But one thing that needs to be done is to basically take the SDF, take the Kurds. They've already separated out many of the Arabs from the SDF, and basically create a situation which limits the ability of the Kurds to have even some sort of federal presence in Syria. And this has a reverberation to all the minorities, the Druze, the Alawite, the Christians, because if the Kurds are in this situation, their situation is dire as well. So they're not solving the problem. What they're doing is essentially putting Band-Aids on it.
So let's go forward from where you are. And you just mentioned the Druze. The Druze are in a somewhat different position because they're next to Israel. They have relations with Israel. There's a huge Druze population in Israel, which is a very loyal and patriotic group of Israeli citizens. What is the likelihood that Israel will find itself in a shooting war on behalf of the Druze? The one group of people who's not abandoning their allies. The Israelis have not abandoned the Druze.
Israel's in a tough position on that one, and they're also a tough position with the Kurds, because the scuttlebutt on, let's say, on Twitter or X and out there in social media is that Israel basically made a deal with the United States and Syria to really stay out of this, right? And of course, Yechiel Leiter denied that. He said, we're not, we support the Kurds. We are 100% in favor of this. But, it's an interesting question because Israel, obviously, its most immediate issue is the border with the Golan and Mount Hermon, and the fear. Now, for example, I read today that Turkey is putting in radars at the airport. There was a thinking that Turkey was going to have a defense agreement that would be able to come in and have bases in Syria. So that raises a high military issue where you could have, because Israel's been coming in and taking out these assets. What if there were a no-fly zone? What if you ended up with a conflict with Turkey, which is a NATO power? So to me, that issue, I would say, would be, again, the highest issue for self-preservation, existential survival of Israel, not to get into a war with Turkey. Certainly that's a calamity. They've got these deconflicting that they're doing, and with Syria. Syria is Shah is very clever. He even announced, and again, it's quite bizarre. He now said, well, we're going to have a lease with the Golan Heights, and then maybe we'll up our relations with Israel. And I want to say, not that you believe all the commentary on Twitter, but most people, it's kind of like at the magic show, come on now, are you kidding me? This is a sleight of hand, a takia.
Okay, but this is, it seems to me, al-Shara wanting to make sure that Israel doesn't invade his country. So he says, okay, fine. They already own the Golan Heights. The president's already said that it's Israeli Golan Heights. They put out a map that showed Syria without the Golan Heights. So all of this, it seems to me, is to say, look, Israel, just stay over there. I'm not attacking you. I'm not, I'll give you a map without the Syrian Golan Heights. I don't have the Golan Heights. But isn't that just a way to sort of limit the damage that Israel can do to him? Because if the Israelis decide to protect the Druze in a serious way, it's a problem.
The problem for Israel, I think, is getting embroiled into a war, into a conflict there. Very dangerous. On the one hand, Israeli Druze are fighting in all battles. They're high officers. They're in every aspect, and they feel a kinship with the Druze. There's a great movie called The Syrian Bride. I don't know if you've ever seen it, but it's about a Druze girl and it's a whole thing where they're trying to cross the line and get married and the whole thing. Yeah, there's no question that there are these artificial lines that have been created by politics with the Syrian people, but the Syrian Druze and the Israeli Druze are very, very close, as I would say the Kurds around the world are up in arms and upset about what's going on in Syria with the Kurds in their being basically squashed by the Syrian forces. The only problem is, and this is really, I think it's sad in a way, is that the Kurds don't have a state, so they're basically separated all over the place, and they do have Kurdistan. So that's the one place they have. It's not a sovereign state, but it has a de facto sovereignty, and actually Turkey and Israel are very friendly with it. So, but that they are very upset there. But
right, make the point. It's yes, Iraqi Kurdistan.
Iraqi Kurdistan.
Yes, is within the boundaries of Iraq. Yeah,
Iraqi Kurdistan, and the Kurds there are up in arms about this. But more importantly, the Kurds in Turkey are upset about this, and President Erdogan is trying to have a peace process in Turkey with the PKK, which is deemed to be a terrorist group by the United States and international organizations, put down their arms, right? Worked up a deal. And so the question is, how do you interact between the peace agreement in Turkey with the large population of Kurds in Turkey? And Kurds have, similarly to the kind of the Druze in Israel, they've been completely integrated in all aspects. The minister of the economy, Mehmet Şimşek, is a Kurd, so they're completely integrated into it. So the fear is that somehow this would upset that balance, and the other part is that in order for President Erdogan to run again, he needs the votes of the DEM Kurdish party in the Turkish parliament. So as you see, the number of moving parts here is very, very problematic. The Kurds, since the Sevres agreement, gave the Kurds a state, but they lost that and lost that. And since that time, as I always quote this article in Foreign Affairs from about 20, 25 years ago, why don't the Kurds have a state? Because it wasn't convenient. And this is so true. Now, whether they should or shouldn't have a state, remember, the group in Syria is not the same. The Kurds around the world are not all the same. They're not there. The group in Syria is more Marxist, more leftist. Iraqi Kurdistan has tribal groups. There's a group in Iran. I mean, there are all kinds of groups everywhere. They're not that united, but I think they feel a kinship, but they don't have the kind of, let's say, state power to do something about it. And the only party around the neighborhood that does have the power to do something about it, and even in general, is Israel. And then there's the United States, of course, and Turkey as well. And so you end up with a real big problem if al-Shara's motive is to stabilize Syria, which he says he wants to centralize Syria. Then is he going to centralize it as a inclusive place where everybody gets a shot, or is he going to bring jihadis in and put them in power, which then you have brewing the same sort of petri dish that you see in Gaza, where you end up having jihadis in power going around massacring and cutting braids off women, off the Kurdish women, which now is the symbol of the women are braiding their hair. This is something that the United States, I think, doesn't really want to tolerate. But then there's Barrack, who's our ambassador, and he says, well, thank you very much for helping us and losing soldiers fighting ISIS, but your time's up. And now, al-Shara, I depend on you and go do this. So to me, the biggest leap of faith since, I don't know, investing in the stock market, maybe, I don't know, because I don't know if what is al-Shara's stock? What is he about? We don't even know. But President Trump does not want to have another Middle Eastern war. I get it. He doesn't want a Middle Eastern war. So he's kind of thinking along Barrack and Turkey, let's just stabilize it. But, they're going to be winners and losers. And it looks like the Kurds are the losers.
And it looks for the moment like the Turks are the winners, not only in Syria, for all the reasons that you said, but also in Gaza. Maybe we should move our eyeballs a little bit and look at Gaza, because Turkey and Qatar are both on the President's Board of Peace. And Turkey and Qatar are the only two countries that have agreed to send troops to the International Stabilization Force. Not a single country in the world, Israel aside, obviously for obvious reasons, will agree to send their troops into Gaza to clean it up or anything else. So you have Turkey and Qatar willing to send troops, which means willing to shore up their Hamas allies. And being on the Board of Peace, it seems that, maybe the president will think that's a good idea. How are we doing in Gaza?
Well, I think that this Board of Peace is a rather funny little instrument, funny little animal. Because
Yes.
if you look at the charter of the Board of Peace, or if you look at the letter that this Mr. Al-Sha'ath, who's supposed to be like the Palestinian technocratic guy who's supposed to come in and manage the whole operation, I looked through it. I don't see the word Hamas. I don't see anything about the purpose, the mission statement. That should be the mission statement of this board, is to create peace, which is synonymous with destroying Hamas. okay? Because with Hamas still in power, there can be no peace, number one. Number two is, what is the purpose of the Board of Peace? The United Nations resolution basically says we're setting this up, Trump, etc., okay, to deal with Gaza. But if you read the charter of the Board of Peace, it's got basically President Trump as the, I think, lifetime chairman. It goes on and on. If you want to join, you have to, kind of pony up $1 billion to be like a permanent member, or you can be there for 3 years. It's a whole structure. It looks like it's got one state, one vote, like the General Assembly. And you throw your hands up and say, wait a minute, what's this about? So to me, what it's about is really about, I think, providing a platform for President Trump after he leaves office to continue being a world leader and dealing with the problems of the world. Of course, he won't be president. I mean, if Vance is president, then that's one thing. But if there's a Democrat who's a president, there's a different scenario. How do you implement the things that you want to do? But, he certainly is a peacemaker and he's a change maker, no question. But heading this up, this mini UN, looks like it's more, it kind of departs from the purpose of it, which was, I think everybody applauded it, the idea to go in and do something with Gaza, maybe make it a Riviera, maybe not the Riviera, but the idea of putting these military troops in that you described, I mean, Israel has said, no way, no way, no way, we're not going to agree with these troops in there. But if those troops go in there, and again, you are, I think, spot on in the sense that the president could relent. And if you look recently, you'll see that President Trump is not, notwithstanding what all the critics of Israel say, he's not in lockstep with Israel and everything. On the contrary, he definitely departs from what Israel wants, no question. And if on this one, he departs and says, okay, put troops in, that creates a tremendous, I think, conundrum and problem, because if the purpose of it is to crush Hamas, which, by the way, we didn't see anywhere in any of the papers, but that should be the purpose of it, but if that's the purpose of it, then having those military troops is just, I think, an imponderable. Now, I would also say, if you look back at Vietnam, you'll remember how first the America put in like advisors, and then we put a few troops in, and then it became a self-fulfilling prophecy, which was infinite and forever, and you could never end it. And that's the problem. Once state troops step foot in there, they're never leaving, okay? They're never leaving. That's what I think. So I think the president has a very hard decision to make, and hopefully Secretary Rubio will weigh in on it, who has been a voice of reason here on all of these things, notwithstanding Barrack, who is a friend of the president, admittedly, and it is traditional for presidents to rely on their friends, but not in making policy, not in making real earth-shaking policy that affects people's lives in a region that is completely upended by crisis. Tom Barrack's Syrian adventure, the Wall Street Journal is not in agreement with crushing the SDF for many reasons. But why they're thinking of Barrack is that leads to stability is befuddling. How can that possibly be? Why not have, and by the way, last point, what's the rush? What was the rush to do all this? What was the rush to go in and say, you have 4 days, you have 2 days, you have 1 day, you have 3 days, you must integrate? I mean, this is how negotiations go. When we negotiated the end of the war in Vietnam, do you remember that one? Do you remember how many times they got together? The table was wrong, the shape of the table, on and on and on and on. Here, I guess we snap our fingers and, okay, you have 4 days to decide, or else you're done. And this is just, I say, Tom Barrack's Syrian adventure gone berserk, gone awry. That's how I see it.
So I actually didn't compare it to Vietnam in my head, in my thinking, because we never actually ended the war in Vietnam. We went home from the war in Vietnam. The Vietnamese continued the war, and they paid the price. But I do look at it as trying to decide how to rebuild Berlin in 1944.
Yes.
And you say to yourself, as long as the bad guys are still in control, you don't have the power to do that. And I will say that the president said this week, and on your point, that Hamas has to be eliminated in order for this board of peace, in order for reconstruction. He said it, but I don't see where the push comes to do it. Even if you said to yourself, we have to get rid of Hamas, and we're going to let Turkey and Qatar disarm them, Turkey and Qatar aren't going to disarm them. So I feel like he's correct. Yes, you need to get rid of Hamas first, but there's no mechanism. And that just leaves the board of peace nowhere, and which is where I think it is. So I don't know what he expects. I was kind of hoping for a board of democratic states, what the UN was intended to be, as a group of democracies talking about problems. Didn't work out that way. The board of peace, I was hoping, would be a board of democracies, but there aren't enough democracies.
Well, the UN itself, if you look at it, it's not a perfect structure because it has the veto. And this structure, if you have one state, one vote, which I think this has, and you can never make a decision that's worthwhile because the key powers have to really control it, at least at the UN, although the UN is a failure. So I don't think right now, sitting with you and I, can really figure out a better structure. But this structure seems, I think, a bit, I don't know, absurd, bizarre. I don't get it. I like the idea of certainly President Trump staying on as chairman for life. That's fine. He's going to do a lot of great things, giving him a platform. But that needed to be separate. That's not part of fixing Gaza. Gaza can be fixed. It can be fixed. I think I'm going to be an optimist, a cautious optimist, but without, again, getting Hamas out of the picture. If you don't have Hamas, if you have Hamas in the picture, as you pointed out, there's no way you're going to do that. And what they're going to do, sit and have meetings, they're going to vote. They're going to sit and vote. And you have the same thing you have at the United Nations, but in this case, it'll be the General Assembly. So they're going to be passing resolutions, I guess, condemning Israel or whatever. They're just going to do the same thing they do at the UN General Assembly. They try to do it at the Security Council, but the United States vetoes it. So if what you want is a replication of failure, which is the UN, then create a board of peace that has a worldwide portfolio and do the same ridiculous things that the UN does, which is completely useless. I mean, it really is. The UN has the Iranian representative sitting there and talking about things. And I'm thinking, why? I mean, the Wall Street Journal was quite clever because they put in an op-ed from the Iranian ambassador. And many people, maybe you and me, I really looked at the page and said, this is an outrage. I'm going to call the Wall Street Journal. But then they had an editorial. They said, read what this guy is saying. And these are their representatives. And they get to fly around here and run around here and sit around the UN. I mean, it would almost be necessary to close the UN if you're going to have people like that having the opportunity to make decisions and have a voice when they're murdering their people, for God's sakes.
I think you hit on it. You need to close the UN and perhaps close the Board of Peace too. I'm not sure. But this raises a question. You have Lebanon, which is not a fully functional country. You have Syria, which is not a fully functional country. You have Gaza, which is not a fully functional area. You have Iran, which is in the middle of what appears to be a civil war. And you have repressive governments of one sort or another in Jordan and Egypt, both of which are subject to, tremors of various sorts. And then you have Israel. Is it possible to have democratic systems work in the Middle East, or are we facing now one of these tsunamis where somebody may come in and decide to have an empire and just conquer the whole thing? I'm not suggesting that, by the way. I'm not recommending that. Just saying.
I mean, it's very profound what you're saying, but I don't think this is any different than it's been all along. Again, I think that the countries that really are standing up, for better or for worse, are really Turkey and Israel. And the fact that they're not that they're not friendly, but they're really antagonistic, and that each one is saying, my greatest enemy is the other one, that's what I'm worried about. I mean, because there are two major powers. There needs to be a détente between them. I don't know how to fix Lebanon with Hezbollah. How do you fix that? Syria we talked about, Gaza we talked about, Iran is, it's just horrific. And whoever wants to think about how to solve it, maybe President Trump is going to do something about Iran, maybe not, but hopefully we will do something about it if we're saying help is on the way. But the countries there, which are really the linchpin of this, really Turkey and Israel. And for me, there will not be an entente, that's for sure, which we did have early on, years ago. People remember this. I was friendly with the Israeli ambassador to Turkey. He told me, wow, what was the atmosphere was just terrific, terrific. There was, El Al was upset because Turkish Airlines had more passengers to Israel. I mean, there was such a time. And so that is not our time right now. There's a lot of rhetoric that is really, really, really bad. Comparisons to Hitler and all this and on and on. I have to repeat what it is. It's terrible. But what we need to do is not just deconflicting, we need to have a détente. In order to do that, that has to be in the interest of both parties to be able to create that. And the only one who can create it is Donald J. Trump. Okay? And he's got to stop diverting attention, because he's very, very busy, from this thing, because this thing is going bad. It's going south. The train is on the way to the station to crash. Now, right now, Syria is not powerful enough to take on Israel. It's not. But Turkey's very powerful. Syria's in again, al-Shara, maybe he's the right guy, maybe he's not the right guy. He doesn't look like the right guy. I don't know how to fix it. It's not in my purview. So those two, Donald J. Trump has to say to the two leaders of Israel and Turkey, you guys just cut it out, or else, Turkey, you want an F-35, we can talk about that, F-16s, Israel, you want this, you want that. I'm not saying to pressure Israel or anyone else. I'm not arguing for that. But I'm saying that Trump, in his own inimitable way, has been able to create opportunities for peace that no one thought could ever exist. I mean, really, if you were just sitting around and ruminating and looking at, trying to look at prophecy, you would say, I cannot believe that Maduro, was taken out of Venezuela, and I can't believe what was done in Iran with the bunker busters and the Iranian nuclear sites. He shows an element of courage that is not, we haven't seen it. We've had great presidents. So I'm saying détente, not entente. We need to stop this, because if we don't, and it goes further and escalates further, we're going to have a real conflict. And it's unimaginable, but it could be imagined.
Okay, so agreeing with your principle that the two of them have to find a way to live together, I suspect that Israel does not have a problem finding a way to live with Turkey, but Turkey has a problem finding a way to live with Israel. And this raises the question about Erdogan himself. I remember when Turkey and Israel were perfectly happy with each other. There was a time when Israel and Iran were good friends. It seems that Erdogan and his Islamist orientation make it harder. And the decline in Israel-Turkey relations comes with Erdogan. Is he going to turn around and say, yeah, it's okay, fine, we'll figure it out? Or, and he's fairly old and he has been ill, do we have to wait till he's gone? I am not suggesting anyone remove him. Just saying, is he one who can look at President Trump and say, you know what, Mr. Trump, you're right? Can he do that?
Well, let's put it this way. All right. Now, the problem, let's suppose that happens and we have our wish, our dreams have come true. And, you're right about the succession. There is discussion of succession in Turkey, either Hakan Fidan or the sons-in-law. They talk about this. Turks talk about it. But right now, Erdogan's enormously popular in Turkey. The problem with what we're talking about, a scenario we're hoping for, is how to unring this bell. And I think this is the problem. In other words, if you have continuously developed rhetoric against Israel, that it's, its leader. And by the way, I remember September 2023, I personally saw that, at that point, Netanyahu was going to, the Turk was going to welcome Erdogan to Israel. I mean, Erdogan was going to go there. And then it all turned around on October 7th, and the reverberations of October 7th are tremendous. But since that time, the rhetoric, all that's been said about Israel in Turkey, and to me, it's heartbreaking, because you can't unring that bell. Because once it's permeated the people's minds and even hearts, and they feel this from all echelons, it's from the bottom of society to the academics, intellectuals, to the government people, everybody, and it's not just in the AK party, it's in the other parties too. It's hard to say, as we proposed, Donald J. Trump meets with them, and they say, okay, we're going to try to be nice in the sandbox now. We're not going to fight each other in the sandbox. We're going to play nice in the sandbox, and we're going to tone down the rhetoric. Then how do you diminish the rhetoric, the feeling among the people? The people might say, no, how can you do that? You just told us yesterday that Israel is responsible for all of these problems, and now you're telling us that we should live together with them. And to me, the answer to that is economics too. We shouldn't forget that, because one of the things that's happening here is that Turkey missed the boat. It missed the boat on, it was going to be an energy deal. You remember this, before October 7th. And Turkey was going to be a major transshipper of energy. And this was the dream of Israeli ministers, of Turkish ministers. And to me, the solution is to say, economics, we might not love each other, but this is the good way forward to help both countries develop in the region. So, and I think the fact that the Gaza war, and this is the point you raised before, whether the Gaza war is on the way to the Riviera or it's on the way to Gaza War 2.0 with the Gaza Peace Board, if in fact the Gaza situation could diminish, I don't know how that happens, diminish at least in the world psyche, right? We see it a little bit also in terms of public opinion now, a lot of it being on immigration and other things around the world. Then maybe there's an opportunity to show kind of what my professor in Yeshiva University said, cui bono, who benefits? So you could benefit. If we have a good relationship, we're going to do energy deals. We're going to, because Turkey lost a big opportunity in the Mediterranean. And now that Israel, Greece, and Greek Cyprus are getting together, the whole issue there in the Eastern Med Forum was that Turkey should not be able to explore in the Eastern Med, the Piri Reis. This was the whole big issue. And they're all drawing lines to fight with each other. How about finding a way to get together and to find economic benefits? You don't love each other, but will help both countries. And Turkey's economy is not in good shape and could benefit from this. So I think Trump's a businessman. Maybe he can make a deal, but I see the way it develops otherwise to be fraught and worrisome.
So you actually went straight to the point of Gaza, which is the same kind of indoctrination that the Turkish people have had, and they haven't had it for all that long. The people of Gaza have had, and they've had it for much longer. And by the way, not just Gaza, but Judea and Samaria also, Palestinians on both sides of Israel. And President Trump does offer economic prosperity, peace, and security. That's what he offers everybody. He did to al-Shara. He did it to Palestinians. He's done it to everyone. If you want peace, prosperity, and security, then you do this thing. And that's where the Abraham Accords came from. Certain countries said, yes, we want peace, security, and prosperity, and we will go with Israel, and we will leave the Palestinians a place at the table, but we're not waiting for the Palestinians. So that worked for them. I don't know if it's going to work among people who've been really indoctrinated, and specifically the Palestinians, for a very long time. The Arabs of Israel are an entirely different mindset So this is another reason that worries me, because we'll go back to Turkey here. To have Turkey heavily involved in this, because the mindset that Turkey promotes and the mindset that Qatar promotes is precisely the opposite of the one you would want, or the one that, for example, the UAE promotes. The UAE wanted to be involved in the rebuilding of the Gaza shipyard. Can you imagine the jobs they would create, creating a shipyard and being able to move stuff to Europe from UAE over that way and that way? But
I wanted to add, I want to say two things, if I might. Number one, um, I think I can't take a pulse for the entire Turkish people or a poll, but I have many Turkish friends that I'm not so sure that maybe that they buy into all this. It's all politics. Point one. Point two, Europe. Let's not forget before we end to blame Europe for a lot of this, because the Europeans have always been the powers that have mixed into this, caused problems, and then just gotten out just in time for everything to collapse. And that goes for Britain and France and all those other countries. They are just, I say the word mischievous, but it's not good enough, because that sounds like maybe they're like Dennis the Menace, but they really create tremendous problems in the world. Britain and France, Palestinian state, and all the things that they promoted. I mean, Keir Starmer, I was in London in November. They were trying, his own party, cabinet was trying to kick him out. I mean, this is the way they project Europe, but Europe never solves anything. It just causes problems. And this is traditional. So at the end of the day, Europe, again, you listen to Canada, listen to Europe about Greenland or anything else. It's all, very acerbic and vituperative and anti-American. Look at what Trump has achieved. So if they would work with him and stay out of the way of trying to achieve a world of peace, we would all be better off. But they won't. They can't do it. Also because of the deterioration of their own societies, which they've allowed to completely collapse. But at the same time, I don't want to let them get off the hook, because they should be involved in this. We shouldn't have needing for a mini NATO or mini UN. We should have Europe on board with the United States, working to make a world of peace. And they're not on board. They're just not.
I would, yes, exclamation point on everything you just said. I mean, just start with India and Pakistan and how the British drew the line and all the dead people.
Exactly.
Yeah, but we've got to go one step farther, because one name has not come up in all of this, or one country has not come up in all of this, and that is Russia.
Yeah.
So Russia had a pretty good position in Syria. They withdrew from a lot of it during the war because it was prudent to do that. Turkey and Russia have long history, and it's not always good history. Talk about how they go, and is Russia going to be able to get back into places like Syria?
Well, when al-Shara gave the interview to The Economist magazine way back with his fancy outfit, he said, Iran will never, ever come back to Syria, but Russia could. And in fact, the Russians want that warm water port. That's what they want. And they'll get it. I mean, I don't know where it stands right now, but originally they were limited in what they could do. But eventually, it's pretty clear. The worry with Russia always was with Syrians and Turks is that they would somehow help the Iranians to sneak back in. And so, yes, I think Russia will be back in Syria. They're very bogged down with Ukraine, but I think that Russia is not anathema, at least according to al-Shara and the Syrian regime. It's Iran and the Shiites. Those are the enemies. And to some extent, of course, Israel, in terms of its ambitions and taking over the buffer zone in Mount Hermon. That's what they care about. But I think Russia will get back, or maybe it's already gotten back, that port in Tartus. And there's another port. They have some other bases as well. But will they become more? Yeah, I think they have. But I'm not sure.
Which would not upset the Israelis all that much either. They had a very good working relationship with Russia, including when they were bombing things in Lebanon and Syria. So maybe I hesitate, because I'm going to bite my tongue here. Russia could be a stabilizing force. if the Russians talk to the Israelis and talk to the Syrians and talk to the Turks, conceivably, the Russians could have a stable. I don't even want to finish saying that.
Well, I think it's hard to envision because, the impact of the Ukraine war on Russia is so formidable. I mean, I think right now they want to get their foothold back because they want that port and those ports or those bases, and that's all they want in the meantime. But it is correct that I don't know how many wars, at least 17 or more wars that Turkey and Russia have fought. And you'll remember the time I think Turkey shot down a Russian plane under strange circumstances, and then Russia punished Turkey by limiting its imports and other things. So you don't, I think there was a peace, they made peace, Erdogan and Putin, but Putin's impact in the world is obviously very, very complex. But I don't know Putin. I haven't talked to him, but I don't think his main thing right now is getting entrenched in Syria, although down the road he might want to again, sure, no question. For geostrategic reasons, he might, no question.
Because everything changes all the time.
Absolutely, absolutely.
So we're coming to the end of the program. And first of all, I would like to thank you for taking us on a big, wide trip. There's no way to look at the Middle East right now in narrow terms. You can't just look at Syria or just look at Turkey or just look at Gaza. Everything is intertwined. And you've done a really good job of showing us where all the things come together. So I'm going to do to you what I do to most guests as we come to the end. And that is look for a question, the answer to which is a positive statement from the guest. Because I like to go out on a positive note. Now, you've made that very difficult because most of what you said lends itself to negative thinking. So your question, Mark, do you have any positive thoughts for either a country or a people or a philosophy to go out on? Who's in good shape here?
I would say that, again, what we've seen in the Middle East is no less than a miracle, honestly. I mean, looking at it just from Israel's point of view, having heard a talk by a member of the Knesset recently, I mean, look at what happened in the Middle East. The Middle East is truly, it's extraordinary. There's nothing like it. There was Israel, attacked on October 7th, and it had fought, of course, with help from the United States and others, existential attacks from very powerful antagonists. And I think that puts the region in a good way, because right now, as I said before, we're at a level here. Of course, the situation in Syria is very problematic. The United States needs to solve it. They can't solve it if they want to. The president needs to be involved in this and try to work up something that works well for the future. So I'm going to be cautiously optimistic that these parties are going to think that they don't want the whole building to collapse and that they want to keep it stable. If that's Turkey's interest, it's the United States' interest, and it's also Israel's interest, because they don't want these regimes. Again, I'm not saying Iran, but as far as Syria is concerned, that's their neighbor, and they want to have at least, I don't know if it's peaceful coexistence, détente, or something where there's no war. And that is going to be very complicated. But I think it also requires, as I said before, president's intervention, not the ambassador making decisions, and also al-Shara coming on board and Turkey working together to include the minorities in Syria in a purposeful way so that they have a chance to participate as well. Because if you don't, and that country again declines and falls into jihadism, we just have a repeat again of all the things we've seen before in the Middle East, the rise of ISIS again. And I think America's got to work. And I said Europe, if they can wake up and come to the table too, will understand that this will also affect them down the road. If you're going to have a resurgent ISIS, you can't have that and have stability in the world. It doesn't end. Like you said, what happens in Syria ends with Syria. It's like Las Vegas. What happens in Syria is going to go to Europe. It's going to go around the world if ISIS can be resurgent. So everybody's going to put their heads together, and I think I'm going to be cautiously optimistic that the president will put his attention on this, send in Marco Rubio, figure something out, and at least cause it to really stabilize. That's the best I can do for optimism.
I'll take it. I'll take it. Cautious optimism. I'll take it. And again, thank you. And I hope you'll come back again. And to all of our listeners, thank you for joining us. And we'll see you soon.
Thank you very much. What a privilege.